Before the sun rose on October 13th, 1307, Paris was already awake. Hooves echoed on stone, doors were marked, names were read from sealed lists. Across France, at the exact same hour, royal agents moved with chilling precision toward commanderies that had stood unchallenged for generations. The Knights Templar, warriors of Christ and bankers of kings, were being arrested as criminals. No warnings, no negotiations, no chance to resist. To the outside world, the assault appeared sudden, even shocking. The order was powerful, wealthy, and protected by the church itself. Yet the speed of the operation tells another story. Warrants had been drafted in secret, confessions were prepared before questions were asked. This was not justice unfolding. It was a net snapping shut. And still, there is an uncomfortable detail historians struggle to explain. When the soldiers arrived, they found silence, not chaos. No desperate attempts to flee, no panicked destruction of records. It was as if the Templars had been waiting, as if they had already accepted that this morning would come. Some chronicles suggest whispers moved through the order days earlier. Others hint that key brothers vanished beforehand, along with documents and treasures no one could later account for. What if the arrests failed to catch their real prize? What if the most important thing was never meant to be defended but removed? By sunrise, the order was broken, but whatever the Templars feared losing most was already gone, swallowed by the darkness before dawn, forever, without trace. They began as 9 impoverished knights, sworn to poverty, obedience, and the protection of pilgrims. No banners, no riches, no promise of glory. Yet within 2 centuries, the Knights Templar had become something no medieval society had ever seen. They were soldiers without borders, monks who answered only to the Pope, and administrators of wealth on a continental scale. Their fortresses stretched from the Holy Land to the Atlantic coast. Their horses, armor, and discipline made them the most effective fighting force of the Crusades. But their real power was quieter, more unsettling. The Templars learned to move money invisibly. A pilgrim could deposit gold in Paris and withdraw it in Jerusalem using coded letters. Kings borrowed from them. Popes trusted them. Empires relied on their ledgers. With that trust came immunity. Templar lands were exempt from taxes. Their ships ignored ports. Their couriers crossed borders unchecked. In an age obsessed with authority, the order answered to almost none. This was not just wealth, it was leverage. And leverage raises an uncomfortable question. Why were rulers willing to tolerate such independence for so long? Was it faith alone or fear? Some historians argue the Templars controlled more than armies and accounts. They controlled information, roots, secrets. Knowledge passed quietly from east to west. If that is true, then the order was never merely powerful. It was indispensable. And anything indispensable eventually becomes dangerous. That danger was invisible, unspoken, and carefully ignored by everyone elsewhere. When the charges were finally read aloud, even seasoned clerics paused. The Templars were accused not of simple corruption, but of ritual obscenity. They were said to deny Christ in secret, to spit upon the cross, to worship a mysterious idol with a bearded face. Some witnesses described a severed head that spoke wisdom. Others hinted at rites performed in darkness, known only to initiates. These accusations felt theatrical, almost unreal. Medieval trials often relied on rumor, yet this collection of claims followed a pattern, repeated across interrogations as if rehearsed. That detail unsettles historians. How did men arrested hundreds of miles apart confess to the same impossible crimes? Torture explains part of it, but not all. Certain descriptions draw from older, forbidden traditions. echoing heresies long condemned by the Church. Scholars note similarities to Gnostic texts, Eastern mysticism, and ideas the Crusaders could only have encountered in the Holy Land. Where did such concepts enter the order? The official explanation insists these stories were fabrications, weapons forged to justify destruction. But if that is true, why choose charges so specific, so symbolic? Why invent blasphemies that hinted at hidden knowledge rather than simple treason? Perhaps the accusations were not invented at all, but distorted reflections of something real, something badly misunderstood, something the Templars were never meant to explain. And in that silence, historians still wonder whether the trial records, the arrests, were meant to seize everything: gold, relics, records, secrets. Royal officials arrived expecting vaults overflowing with wealth accumulated over 2 centuries. Instead, they found empty chambers, quiet treasuries, and inventories that made no sense. The order that financed wars and lent to kings appeared suddenly poor. At commanderies across France, the same puzzle repeated. Ledgers stopped abruptly. Reliquaries were gone. Ships once docked at Templar ports had vanished days earlier. It was as if the order had been carefully hollowed out from within. Not looted in panic, but cleared with intention. This absence disturbed Philip's agents more than any confession. Medieval governments understood greed. They did not understand preparation. Someone had anticipated the arrests down to the hour. Someone had decided what must disappear and what could be sacrificed. Official records mention missing gold, but later investigations suggest money was not the greatest loss. Certain chests were never recovered. Certain documents were never catalogued. And whatever the Templars valued most, they did not leave behind. History often remembers destruction, not what escapes it. But here the silence is the clue. Whatever vanished that night was not taken by force. It was removed quietly, deliberately, and forever beyond reach. And that is the moment the mystery truly begins. From that emptiness emerges a question historians cannot answer, because whatever the Templars protected enough to vanish may have been the very thing that doomed them, and the only thing powerful enough to survive their fall without ever being seen again. When the first Templars arrived in Jerusalem, they were not given a castle or a battlefield. Instead, King Baldwin II offered them a strange residence, the ruins of the ancient Temple of Solomon, built atop the most contested sacred ground on earth. Officially, it was a gesture of gratitude. Officially, it made little sense. Why place a military order inside a religious ruin layered with forbidden history? The name they adopted is telling. They did not call themselves crusaders or warriors. They became the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, literally Knights of the Temple. Medieval names were rarely poetic accidents. This one was deliberate. Ancient texts describe the temple as more than a house of worship. Jewish tradition claimed it was built over a divine nexus, a place where heaven and earth intersected. Beneath it, legends spoke of sealed chambers, hidden vaults, and objects too dangerous to be displayed openly. The Bible itself hints that something sacred was concealed, protected from the unworthy. The Templars lived directly above this ground for nearly a decade. That fact alone troubles historians. They were not idle monks. They were disciplined, organized, and methodical, and yet no official records explain why they remained there so long without engaging in warfare. Some scholars suggest the temple was chosen not for defense, but for access. Access to something ancient, something forgotten, something deliberately buried. If so, The order's true mission may have begun underground in silence, long before it was ever seen on a battlefield. Jerusalem is a city built on its own past, layer upon layer of conquered memory. Digging beneath it was dangerous politically and spiritually. Yet multiple medieval sources quietly mention tunnels, shafts, and underground chambers beneath the Templars' quarters. These were not public works, they were hidden. No official excavation records survive. That absence is suspicious. Construction leaves paperwork. Silence suggests intention. Chroniclers of the time described the Templars as unusually interested in the city's foundations, its forgotten passages, its sealed spaces. Muslim historians later noted disturbances beneath the Temple Mount during this period. What exactly were they digging for? Some argue it was defensive exploration. Others see a systematic search, guided by knowledge brought from Europe or acquired locally. The precision implied by later legends suggests purpose, not curiosity. Archaeology cannot easily reach these depths today. The area remains restricted, contested, and politically volatile. That makes verification impossible and speculation irresistible. What if the Templars uncovered something no later power was allowed to rediscover? Civilizations are not reshaped by swords alone. They are reshaped by ideas, by revelations that alter belief systems. If the Templars found such a revelation beneath Jerusalem, it would explain their sudden rise, their secrecy, and the fear they later inspired. History records no discovery, but history also records deliberate erasure. And sometimes what is missing tells a far more dangerous story than what remains. Relics, texts, or something else entirely. Over centuries, theories multiplied to fill the silence. The Ark of the Covenant is the most famous candidate, described in Scripture as a device of divine power, lost before the Babylonian conquest. Others suggest the menorah, sacred vessels, or royal archives of ancient Israel, vanished into the temple's depths. More unsettling are theories involving texts, lost books of scripture, alternate creation stories, or teachings that contradicted later religious authority. Gnostic writings discovered in modern times prove such texts once existed. What if the Templars found earlier versions, older truths never meant to resurface? Then there are the theories scholars hesitate to discuss. Ancient technology, knowledge of geometry, energy, or cosmology inherited from civilizations far older than medieval Europe. Ideas dismissed as impossible, yet strangely echoed in Templar architecture centuries later. None of these theories can be proven, none can be fully dismissed. The evidence is circumstantial, fragmented, and incomplete, but the persistence of these ideas is itself revealing. People sense that something profound is missing from the historical record. If the Templars found nothing, their time beneath the temple makes no sense. If they found something simple, the secrecy makes no sense. Only one possibility fits the pattern. Whatever they uncovered was too powerful, too destabilizing to ever be acknowledged openly. Artifacts can be stolen. Gold can be reclaimed. But knowledge changes everything. If the Templars uncovered information beneath the Temple Mount, it would explain why their influence expanded so rapidly and so quietly. Knowledge creates leverage, especially when others fear it. Imagine a truth that undermined divine authority, royal legitimacy, or the Church's exclusive claim to spiritual interpretation. Such a truth would not need to be spoken publicly to be dangerous. Its mere existence would be enough. The Templars never revealed what they knew. They acted instead. They built networks. They amassed protection. They answered only to the Pope. They placed themselves beyond normal control, as if preparing for a future confrontation they expected. Kings tolerate power until they feel threatened by it. The sudden ferocity of the crackdown suggests fear, not justice. Fear that the order possessed something capable of unraveling the medieval world's foundations. If that knowledge existed, destroying the Templars would not destroy it. Information survives people. It can be hidden, encoded, transferred, or buried again. Perhaps that was always the plan. Beneath Solomon's temple, something ancient may have waited centuries to be found. And when it was, it changed everything quietly, invisibly, until the moment the world noticed. By then, it was already too late. Long before marble bank halls and printed notes, the Templars built a system that should not have existed in the medieval world. Pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem faced bandits, shipwrecks, and extortion. Carrying gold across continents was often a death sentence. The Templars offered a solution so elegant it feels anachronistic. A traveler could deposit valuables at a Templar house in Europe and receive a coded document redeemable thousands of miles away. This was not simple safekeeping. It required standardized valuation, trusted verification, secure communication, and a network capable of honoring promises across borders. No other institution could do this. Not kings, not churches, only the Templars. Their commanderies functioned as vaults, clearinghouses, and international transfer points. Money moved without physically moving. Wealth became abstract, symbolic, and controllable. This was a conceptual leap centuries ahead of its time. The order did not advertise this innovation. It grew quietly, almost invisibly, until Europe depended on it. Nobles entrusted dowries. Merchants trusted letters. Monarchs funded wars through Templar credit. The system worked because it was built on absolute secrecy and absolute trust. That combination is rare and dangerous. Whoever controls trust controls power, and the Templars were no longer just warriors of faith. They were architects of an invisible economy, one no crown truly understood, but all relied upon. Templar accounting records, where they survive at all, are frustratingly opaque. Symbols replace words. Totals appear without explanation. Entire transactions seem to vanish between entries. Historians long assumed poor preservation. Others suspect something more deliberate. Medieval banking normally left trails. Debts were recorded, witnessed, sealed. Yet many Templar transfers left no obvious counterpart. Wealth moved silently, as if deliberately concealed. Some researchers argue the order used basic ciphers, not to hide money, but to obscure purpose. If gold was not the real cargo, what was being moved? Certain accounts reference custody rather than payment. Others mention shipments without valuation. These anomalies suggest the system was used to protect something priceless, something that could not be openly named. Encoded ledgers would make sense if exposure meant catastrophe. Knowledge, relics, texts, or instructions might be disguised as financial assets. In such a system, money becomes camouflage. No complete Templar ledger has ever been recovered. That absence may be the point. Without records, intent disappears. And without intent, investigators see only fragments, never the full design. The order mastered silence. Not secrecy through walls, but secrecy through normalcy. Transactions that looked mundane, routine, forgettable, and within that routine, something else may have been moving, unseen and untouched by law or crown. The scale of Templar wealth shocked contemporaries, but wealth alone does not explain their behavior. They lived simply. They did not indulge like nobles. They reinvested relentlessly. Gold flowed in and flowed out, rarely accumulating where it could be seized. This pattern suggests purpose beyond profit. Money was useful because it built independence. It purchased immunity. It created leverage against kings who needed loans and popes who needed logistics. If the order had discovered something beneath Jerusalem, something dangerous to reveal, wealth would be the perfect shield. Money funds secrecy. It buys silence. It enables movement without questions. The Templars behaved like custodians, not owners. Their assets were tools to protect something else, something fragile enough to be destroyed, yet powerful enough to justify extreme caution. Their vows of poverty become ironic in this light. Individually poor, collectively unstoppable. Wealth existed, but not for pleasure. It existed to sustain an infrastructure of concealment. When the arrests came, the gold's disappearance shocked authorities. But perhaps the gold was never the point. Perhaps it was always expendable, a distraction, a decoy. The true treasure was something wealth could defend, but never replace. By the early 14th century, Europe's monarchs were trapped in a quiet dependency. Wars were expensive, administrations were inefficient, taxation sparked revolt. The Templars offered loans without rebellion. Philip IV of France was the most indebted of all. His treasury was empty. His ambitions were not. He owed the order vast sums, with no realistic way to repay them. Debt is humiliation for a king. It reverses hierarchy. The borrower answers to the lender. And the Templars did not bend. Financial dependence breeds fear. Fear seeks solutions. And sometimes the solution is elimination. By destroying the order, Philip could erase his obligations and seize assets. Officially, it was about heresy. Unofficially, it was about survival. Other rulers watched carefully. Some cooperated, others hesitated. But once the process began, no king openly resisted. The irony is cruel. The Templars created systems to stabilize power. Those systems made them indispensable, and indispensability made them intolerable. When kings became debtors, the balance of power shattered, and the response was not reform, but annihilation. Philip IV did not wake one morning filled with righteous fury. His reign was marked by constant financial crisis, wars against England, conflict with Flanders, administrative expansion. Each campaign drained resources he did not have. The Templars filled the gap. They funded his wars, safeguarded his treasury, and managed royal finances. Over time, the king became dependent, and dependency erodes authority. Philip had already clashed with the papacy, even arresting Pope Boniface VIII. He understood power was not sacred, it was negotiable, and the Templars stood in his way. By 1307, his debt was staggering, repayment was impossible, forgiveness unthinkable. The solution required spectacle. Moral outrage provided cover. Accusations of heresy transformed financial crime into divine duty. Seizing Templar assets became purification. Killing creditors became justice. Philip's urgency reveals fear. Fear not just of debt, but of what the order might represent. An institution immune to kings. A power structure that answered elsewhere. Eliminating the Templars restored hierarchy, or so he believed. In truth, it revealed the fragility of royal authority, exposed when a king must destroy his benefactors to survive. Pope Clement V was not a revolutionary. He was cautious, pragmatic, and deeply aware of political realities. Privately, he expressed doubts about the charges against the Templars. Publicly, he sanctioned their destruction. Why? Because the papacy was weak. Clement owed his position partly to French influence. His court resided in Avignon, not Rome. He was surrounded by Philip's allies. Evidence suggests Clement attempted delays, investigations, compromises. Each was met with pressure, military threats, political isolation. The implication was clear: cooperation or conflict. The church faced a dilemma: defend the Templars and risk fracture, or sacrifice them to preserve stability. Clement chose survival. In doing so, the papacy legitimized a lie. The trials proceeded, confessions were accepted, condemnation followed. This compliance haunts church history. It shows that spiritual authority could be bent by secular fear, that truth could be sacrificed for peace. If the Pope suspected innocence, his silence becomes a form of guilt. And if he suspected something worse, something destabilizing, his decision becomes chillingly pragmatic. The confessions emerged quickly, disturbingly so. Men described rituals identical in language, detail, and symbolism. Denials followed by admissions. Admissions followed by recantations. Torture explains much. Medieval interrogations were brutal, systematic, and designed to produce agreement. Pain creates narratives. Survival demands compliance, yet certain elements stand out. The confessions include obscure symbols, strange rites, and theological deviations too complex for improvisation. These were not random lies, they followed structure. Some historians argue interrogators fed details. Others believe fragments of misunderstood rituals were exaggerated. Either way, truth dissolved under pressure. Men confessed to things they later died denying. Others retracted statements knowing execution would follow. This behavior suggests belief, not guilt. The trials read like theater, roles assigned, lines repeated, outcomes predetermined. In that fire-lit silence, whatever the Templars truly knew remained unspoken. Torture extracts noise, not truth, and in the chaos of pain, the real secret remained untouched, safely buried beneath layers of accusation and fear. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Templar trials is what did not survive. Entire transcripts vanished. Witness lists disappeared. Financial inventories were incomplete. Some documents were destroyed deliberately. Others were never created. Key testimonies referenced but never recorded. Historians encounter gaps that feel intentional, events described without evidence, decisions justified without rationale. These absences protect something. They prevent reconstruction. They ensure ambiguity. If the trials were a performance, the missing records conceal the rehearsal. They hide motive. They erase hesitation. Without full documentation, history cannot convict or absolve. It can only speculate, and speculation is dangerous because it invites uncomfortable questions. Questions about power, fear, and secrets buried deep enough to justify obliteration. What was not written down may be the most honest testimony of all. Silence, after all, can be the loudest confession. La Rochelle was one of the Templars' most important ports, a quiet Atlantic gateway connecting their European commanderies to the wider world. It was heavily fortified, meticulously managed, and unusually autonomous. Royal officials assumed that if the order possessed treasure, it would be there, but when they arrived after the arrests, the harbor told a different story. According to scattered accounts, Templar ships had departed days earlier under cover of routine operations. No alarms were raised, no pursuit followed. The fleet simply vanished into the Atlantic, leaving behind empty docks and unanswered questions. For an order under sudden suspicion, the timing was too precise to dismiss as coincidence. Medieval fleets did not disappear easily. Ships required crews, supplies, destinations. Yet no records identify where these vessels went. No ports reported their arrival. No wreckage was found. It was as if the sea itself swallowed them. This suggests planning, coordination, and foreknowledge. Someone knew the arrests were coming. Someone prioritized evacuation over defense. and someone ensured the escape left no trail. Royal investigators were disturbed. A fleeing fleet implied guilt or intelligence. Either explanation was dangerous. If the Templars ran, they were conspirators. If they prepared, they were informed. The disappearance reframes the entire collapse. This was not a panicked flight, it was an extraction. And whatever those ships carried was valuable enough to justify abandoning the Order's visible power to preserve something unseen. Scotland in 1307 was an unlikely refuge, excommunicated, politically unstable, and defiant of papal authority. It existed outside the church's immediate reach. That made it dangerous and safe. Legends claim Templar ships reached Scottish shores, welcomed by Robert the Bruce, himself condemned by Rome. The Sinclairs, a powerful noble family with later ties to strange architecture and symbolism, are often named as protectors. Rosslyn Chapel, built a century later, fuels speculation. Its carvings depict imagery unknown in medieval Europe: corn, aloe, symbolic geometries that seem out of place. Some believe these were messages, echoes of knowledge preserved in exile. There is no direct proof, but absence again speaks loudly. Templar records in Scotland are curiously quiet. No mass arrests occurred, no trials unfolded. If survivors arrived, they melted into society, protected by distance and politics. Sanctuary does not require acknowledgement, it requires silence. If the Templars carried something too dangerous to surrender, Scotland offered anonymity, a place where papal decrees held little power and royal protection mattered more than doctrine. Perhaps the order did not end. Perhaps it fractured, adapted, and hid in places where history was less vigilant, and if so, Scotland may have been less a destination than a beginning. While France burned the order, Portugal chose a different path. King Denis de Riron publicly complied with papal demands, dissolving the Templars on paper. Privately, he ensured their survival. Within years, the Order of Christ was founded. Its members were former Templars. Its assets were Templar assets. Its symbols were unmistakably familiar. Only the name had changed. This was not resistance, it was strategy. By rebranding, Portugal preserved expertise, infrastructure, and knowledge without provoking Rome. The Templars vanished, yet remained intact. The Order of Christ later funded Portugal's age of exploration. Ships crossed unknown seas. Maps improved rapidly. Navigation advanced. It is tempting to draw lines between preserved knowledge and sudden expansion. Suppression, it seems, was selective. Where rulers valued the order's capabilities, survival was negotiated. Where fear dominated, destruction followed. Portugal's choice suggests the Templars were too useful to erase completely. And usefulness often implies possession of something others lack. If secrets were carried away by ship, Portugal's ports may have been quiet recipients, not of treasure, but of continuity. Gold is heavy, it leaves trails, it attracts attention. Yet the most elaborate escape in medieval history makes little sense if the goal was wealth alone. Kings seized gold easily. Ideas were harder to confiscate. The precision of the fleet's departure implies priority. Not everything was taken, only what mattered most. If the Templars carried relics, they chose carefully. If they carried texts, they selected those worth saving. If they carried knowledge, it was likely fragmented, encoded, and dispersed. Perhaps nothing physical was taken at all. And perhaps the real cargo was memorized, taught, passed quietly from one initiate to another. Knowledge needs no ship, only people. That possibility is the most unsettling. It means the secret was never lost at sea. It traveled in minds, survived in symbols, waited in silence. The escape was not about preservation of the order's image. It was about preservation of something far more fragile and far more dangerous. Whatever justified that flight was not meant for royal vaults or public altars. It was meant to survive history itself. And if it did, then the Templars did not lose their greatest treasure. They simply removed it from reach, leaving the world to wonder what vanished and why it was worth everything to keep it hidden. Across Europe, churches linked to the Templars feel subtly wrong, not ruined, not unfinished, but disobedient to expectation. Their layouts ignore standard Christian orientation. Their proportions feel deliberate yet unsettling. Circles replace crosses. Eight-sided designs recur where none should exist. To the casual observer, these structures appear merely unusual. To architects and historians, they are anomalies. Medieval church building followed strict theological rules. Measurements reflected doctrine. Orientation reflected scripture, yet Templar sites repeatedly deviate from these norms. Floors align with solstices instead of altars. Columns follow ratios that have no liturgical explanation. In some places, symmetry is broken unintentionally, as if to signal something hidden rather than honor something visible. These deviations are too consistent to be mistakes. They suggest design choices governed by principles outside conventional theology. Builders followed instructions that prioritized meaning over orthodoxy. Even more troubling is repetition. From England to Portugal, structures separated by vast distances share the same irregularities. This implies shared knowledge and deliberate transmission. Someone taught these patterns. Someone insisted they be preserved. If these churches were merely houses of worship, such deviations would invite condemnation, yet they stood unchallenged for generations. Either no one noticed or no one understood what they were seeing. The buildings behave like coded objects, masquerading as sanctuaries. And like any code, they remain silent until someone learns how to read them. Geometry was once considered divine language. Lines and ratios were thought to reflect cosmic order, truths embedded in creation itself. Long before modern science, ancient cultures used geometry to encode knowledge beyond words. The Templars appear to have inherited this tradition. Many Templar structures incorporate ratios associated with harmony, balance, and energy flow. The golden ratio appears repeatedly. So do precise angles linked to astronomical cycles. These are not decorative flourishes. They are mathematical statements. What unsettles scholars is timing. Such principles should not appear systematically in medieval Europe. Their reemergence is usually credited to the Renaissance. Yet the Templars were using them centuries earlier. This suggests access to older sources, knowledge preserved from antiquity, perhaps from texts lost elsewhere, perhaps from discoveries beneath Jerusalem. Sacred geometry does not announce itself. It hides in plain sight. Only those trained to see it recognize its presence. If the Templars embedded geometry intentionally, then architecture became their language. Stone replaced parchment. Buildings became books that could not be burned. And unlike written texts, geometry transcends translation. Its meaning endures, even when the culture that created it disappears. That durability may have been the point. The Templars were soldiers. They understood impermanence. They watched empires rise and fall. If they believed destruction was inevitable, they may have planned accordingly. Symbols carved into stone endure longer than institutions. Patterns outlast persecution. If knowledge could not survive openly, It could be hidden structurally. Certain carvings appear deliberately placed where discovery requires effort beneath staircases, high above sight lines. In crypts rarely accessed, these are not aesthetic choices. They are placements meant to delay understanding. Some symbols appear incomplete unless viewed from specific angles. Others align only on certain dates. These constraints suggest intention, messages meant for those who knew where and when to look. This was not communication for contemporaries, it was communication across time. The order may have assumed future rediscovery, or at least hoped for it, by embedding fragments rather than explanations. They ensured survival without exposure. These messages are not instructions, they are prompts, invitations to question, to connect, to search. And in that sense, Templars may still be speaking, not loudly, not clearly, but persistently. If these symbols were merely decorative, they would be harmless curiosities. But their consistency, placement, and complexity suggest something more urgent. What if they were warnings, not celebrations of knowledge, but markers of danger? Signals left by those who discovered something they believed humanity was not ready to face. A warning cannot be explicit. Explicit warnings are destroyed, subtle ones endure. The Templars may have encoded caution into beauty, geometry that unsettles, designs that resist interpretation, structures that provoke unease rather than comfort. Perhaps they discovered truths that destabilize belief. Perhaps they realized power rests not in artifacts but in understanding. And perhaps they chose silence because revelation would invite chaos. If so, the symbols matter because they are reminders that knowledge has consequences, that not everything uncovered should be revealed. They ask a question rather than provide an answer. What did the Templars see that convinced them to hide, encode, and disappear? As long as these symbols remain, the question remains open. And as long as the question survives, the silence of the Templars is not complete. Jacques de Molay was not a revolutionary nor a mystic recluse. He was an administrator, a soldier, a man shaped by decades of discipline and duty. When he became Grand Master of the Knights Templar, the order was already ancient, powerful, and deeply entangled in European politics. His role was to preserve it, not redefine it. Yet history placed him at the center of its destruction. Arrested, imprisoned, and paraded as proof of corruption, de Molay endured years of confinement. Unlike others, he never fled. Unlike others, he never vanished. He remained visible, accessible, and silent. That silence is unsettling. A man at the center of a collapsing world, accused of unspeakable heresies, facing torture and death, yet refusing to explain himself. He recanted confessions extracted under pain, knowing the consequence. He chose truth as he understood it, even when it offered no escape. As Grand Master, de Molay would have known everything the order protected. He was the final repository of its collective memory. If there was a secret, it lived with him. When he was led to execution in 1314, the order officially ended. But mysteries do not end with institutions. They end when witnesses speak. De Molay did not, and in that refusal, he became more than a man. He became a boundary. On one side, recorded history. On the other, something deliberately withheld. As the fire rose around him, Jacques de Molay spoke words that would echo through centuries. He called Pope Clement V and King Philip IV to answer before God within the year. To medieval ears, this was a curse. To modern minds, it sounds like desperation. Yet the timing unsettles even skeptics. The Pope died within weeks. The king followed months later, his dynasty collapsing soon after. Coincidence is the historian's refuge, but coincidence repeated becomes uncomfortable. Was de Molay cursing his enemies or stating something he knew? If the Templars possessed knowledge that shaped outcomes, his words might have been less threat than observation. Medieval people believed in divine justice. They believed truth eventually surfaced. De Molay may have believed that too, or he may have known forces were already in motion, consequences already unfolding. The execution speech is brief, measured, and calm. Not the rant of a broken man, not the plea of an innocent. It reads like closure. That calm suggests certainty, and certainty at death is rare. Whether curse or prophecy, the effect was the same. The men who destroyed the Templars did not outlive them by long, and history noticed. Silence can be louder than confession. Throughout his imprisonment, de Molay had opportunities to speak freely, to explain, to bargain, to accuse others. He did none of these. Torture broke many men. It did not break him permanently. When given the chance to reaffirm his confessions publicly, he withdrew them. He chose execution over compliance. Why? Innocence alone does not always inspire such resolve. Fear often overcomes principle. Yet de Molay stood firm. If he carried knowledge dangerous enough to justify the order's destruction, speaking it might have endangered others. Silence would protect them. Secrets survive by containment. De Molay may have believed that truth, once released, could not be controlled. Better to let it die with him than let it be twisted, exploited, or weaponized. This was not cowardice, it was stewardship. In refusing to speak, de Molay ensured that whatever the Templars knew would not be filtered through torture chambers or royal courts. It would remain intact, uncorrupted, and unreachable. The flames consumed his body. They did not extract his knowledge. And that failure may have been his final victory. History is built on documents, testimonies, and artifacts. But some knowledge leaves no trace. It is designed that way. The Templars operated on long timelines. They thought in generations, not moments. If they believed a truth was too volatile for their age, they may have planned its disappearance. Some secrets are not meant to be rediscovered easily. They are meant to test readiness. Understanding requires context. Without it, revelation becomes destruction. By embedding fragments in architecture, by dispersing members, by refusing to speak at the end, the order may have engineered oblivion as protection. This raises a troubling idea that some truths are not lost by accident. They are buried intentionally, even by those who uncover them. If so, de Molay's silence was not tragic, it was necessary. The greatest mysteries persist not because evidence is lacking, but because the final witnesses chose restraint. And when men die holding secrets, history is left with shadows. Perhaps the Templars understood something fundamental, that knowledge without wisdom is dangerous, and that silence at the right moment can shape the future more powerfully than any revelation ever could. Centuries after the last Templar burned, new brotherhoods emerged that felt strangely familiar. Freemasonry, in particular, adopted symbols, rituals, and hierarchical initiations that echoed the vanished order. Compasses, squares, oaths of secrecy, and allegorical instruction replaced swords and armor, but the structure remained recognizable. No document proves a direct lineage. That absence fuels debate rather than ending it. Medieval survivors would not have advertised continuity. Survival required disguise, reinvention, patience. Masonic legends speak of ancient knowledge preserved through catastrophe, guarded by initiates sworn to silence. These stories are dismissed as myth, yet myths often preserve memory when facts become dangerous. The timing is provocative. Freemasonry flourished in regions where Templar presence had been strong and suppression less absolute. Its emphasis on geometry, moral symbolism, and hidden meaning mirrors Templar architecture and philosophy. Skeptics argue coincidence. Believers argue inheritance. The truth may be subtler. Ideas do not require institutions to survive. They migrate. If Templar knowledge escaped destruction, it would seek new vessels. Organizations built around secrecy, symbolism, and gradual revelation would be ideal hosts. Whether Freemasonry is descendant or echo, it represents a continuation of something older, and continuations rarely happen without origins. History does not move smoothly. Ideas vanish for centuries, then reappear fully formed, as if rediscovered rather than invented. Navigation techniques, architectural principles, financial concepts, and philosophical frameworks sometimes emerge without clear ancestry. During the Renaissance, Europe suddenly remembered geometry, astronomy, and classical knowledge. Officially, this came from rediscovered texts. Unofficially, some advancements seem too rapid to complete. The Templars sat at the crossroads of East and West. They had access to Islamic scholarship, ancient Greek philosophy, and possibly older sources still. If they preserved knowledge during Europe's intellectual dormancy, its later resurfacing would appear miraculous. Certain techniques attributed to Renaissance geniuses resemble principles visible in earlier Templar structures. Sacred geometry, harmonic proportion, and symbolic instruction reemerge with confidence, not experimentation. This raises a quiet question. Were these ideas rediscovered or released? If knowledge was preserved deliberately, its reappearance could be timed, introduced gradually, stripped of dangerous context, rendered acceptable. Such controlled dissemination would require patience, planning, and anonymity. It would leave no paper trail, only results. When knowledge resurfaces too conveniently, historians call it coincidence. But coincidence repeated across disciplines begins to feel like choreography. The Templars were not the first group to disappear into legend, nor were they the last. History is shaped not only by visible rulers, but by invisible networks that influence without recognition. After 1307, former Templars did not vanish biologically. They aged, adapted, and integrated. Skills do not dissolve with institutions. Neither does memory. Some may have entered other orders. Others served new masters. A few may have remained loyal to a purpose larger than the order itself. Hidden influence does not require control. It requires continuity, passing ideas quietly, protecting principles, waiting. If the Templars believed they safeguarded dangerous knowledge, withdrawal would be strategic. Public power attracts destruction. Subtle influence endures. Legends of hidden hands persist because people sense continuity beneath disruption. Patterns reappear, symbols recur, structures repeat. This does not require conspiracy. It requires survival instinct. History records explosions. It rarely records embers. Yet embers carry fire forward. If the Templars survived in fragments, their shadow would be diffuse, deniable, and resilient, exactly the kind that history struggles to erase. Survival invites a question more unsettling than extinction. If the Templars endured, why not return? Why not reclaim reputation, wealth, or power? The answer may be caution. Exposure invites scrutiny. Scrutiny invites distortion, and distortion destroys meaning. Secrecy can be ethical. Some knowledge revealed too early destabilizes belief systems. It creates fear rather than understanding. The Templars may have learned this firsthand. Their destruction followed exposure, not silence. Visibility proved fatal. If they survived, they may have chosen invisibility as doctrine. Influence without attribution, preservation without recognition, hidden guardianship avoids corruption. Power sought is power lost. Power withheld remains intact. Secrecy also filters audiences. Only those willing to question, to search, to doubt official narratives encounter fragments of truth. Others pass by unchanged. Perhaps the final safeguard was not walls or weapons, but restraint, a decision to let humanity mature before revelation. Or perhaps the secret itself demands concealment because its implications challenge authority, identity, and meaning. If so, staying hidden was not cowardice, it was responsibility. And the Templar shadow remains not because it seeks attention, but because some truths are safest when they refuse to be fully seen. Among scholars, there is a quiet boundary rarely crossed. It is the point where history brushes against belief, where evidence threatens doctrine. The forbidden knowledge hypothesis lives beyond that boundary. It suggests the Templars encountered truths that directly contradicted the Church's foundational claims. This does not mean simple heresy. It implies structural contradiction, ideas about divinity, creation, or humanity's role that made centralized spiritual authority unnecessary. Such knowledge would not merely offend doctrine, it would dissolve it. The Crusades exposed Europeans to Eastern philosophies, Gnostic traditions, and ancient theological debates long erased in the West. Some of these traditions framed Christ not as a singular divine exception, but as an example of universal potential. Others rejected intermediaries entirely. If the Templars encountered texts or teachings that reframed salvation as internal rather than institutional, the consequences would be profound. Faith would no longer require obedience. Authority would lose its anchor. This theory explains the unusual charges of idol worship and denial of Christ. Such accusations may have been distorted interpretations of ideas. The Church could not tolerate being understood. Historians avoid this theory because it destabilizes more than the Templar story. It destabilizes the narrative of uninterrupted doctrinal control. If the Templars discovered forbidden knowledge, destroying them would not be vengeance, it would be containment. And containment always suggests something real was found. More controversial still are theories that the Templars uncovered remnants of ancient science far beyond medieval understanding. These ideas are often dismissed, not because they are disproven, but because they disrupt accepted timelines. Ancient civilizations demonstrated knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering that modern scholarship struggles to explain, structures aligned with celestial events, built with precision, difficult to replicate even today. If such knowledge survived into hidden repositories, the Templars were uniquely positioned to find it. Their access to Jerusalem, combined with resources and secrecy, made them ideal custodians. Some believe they encountered principles related to energy, sound, or geometry that influenced their architecture. This would explain structural anomalies and recurring ratios that seem scientifically informed rather than symbolically decorative. Critics argue coincidence, yet coincidence repeated across continents and generations begins to strain credibility. Lost science does not require machines, it requires understanding, principles rather than devices. If the Templars encountered fragments of such knowledge, they may have recognized its danger. Advanced understanding in a society unprepared for it often leads to exploitation rather than enlightenment. Preserving it quietly would be ethical restraint, not arrogance. Historians resist these theories because they blur the line between past and present. They suggest humanity has forgotten more than it has learned. Heresy was never the church's greatest fear. Heresy could be corrected, punished, erased. Irrelevance could not. If the Templars uncovered truths that made authority unnecessary, the threat would be existential. Power rests on exclusivity, on control of access to meaning. Imagine knowledge that rendered priests optional, kings symbolic, hierarchies artificial. Not by force, but by understanding. Such truth would not incite rebellion immediately. It would erode obedience quietly. It would make obedience feel unnecessary. The church's response to the Templars was absolute: no reform, no debate, only eradication. That response suggests fear deeper than doctrinal disagreement. Philip IV's involvement reinforces this. Kings rely on belief as much as armies. Undermining spiritual authority undermines secular rule. The speed and coordination of the arrests suggest panic disguised as righteousness, a threat identified and eliminated before it could spread. If the Templars held knowledge capable of collapsing authority structures, silence would be essential. Speaking would create uncontrollable consequences. The destruction of the order preserved the system, at least temporarily, but systems built on suppression eventually confront what they bury. Authority survives challenges only when truth remains inaccessible. If the real danger was irrelevance, history's violence begins to make sense. Despite centuries of dismissal, these theories persist, not because of evidence alone, but because of pattern. Where records vanish, speculation grows. Where power responds disproportionately, suspicion follows. The Templars left gaps. Gaps invite questions, and unanswered questions breed endurance. Suppression does not erase curiosity, it sharpens it. Each attempt to close discussion confirms there is something worth discussing. These ideas survive because they resonate with intuition. They align with the sense that history is curated, not complete. Modern discoveries of lost texts, forgotten technologies, and misdated knowledge keep reopening doors once thought sealed. Every generation asks the same question in new language. What else was known, and why was it hidden? The Templars sit at the center of that question because their fall was too sudden, too absolute, too fearful. If they were merely corrupt, exposure would have sufficed. Instead, obliteration followed. Ideas never die when they explain anomalies better than official narratives, and the Templars explain too much to be forgotten. As long as history contains silence, theories will speak, and the silence surrounding the Templars remains one of the loudest. After centuries of speculation, one possibility remains strangely consistent. The Templars' ultimate secret may not have been an object at all. Not gold, not relics, not technology, but a realization about the nature of power, belief, and human authority. Every physical theory struggles with the same problem. Objects can be seized, texts can be burned, artifacts leave trails, yet nothing definitive was ever recovered. What endured instead was influence, structure, and silence. A philosophical realization explains this better than any treasure. If the Templars concluded that power does not originate from divine mandate, bloodline, or institution, but from belief itself, everything changes. Authority becomes conditional. Sacred hierarchy becomes constructed. Obedience becomes optional. Such a realization would not need to be revealed publicly to be dangerous. Those who understand it would behave differently. They would build systems quietly. They would avoid direct confrontation. They would prepare for inevitability. This reframes everything the Templars did: their independence, their secrecy, their refusal to explain themselves, their silence at the end. They may not have been guarding something external. They may have been guarding understanding. And understanding, once internalized, cannot be confiscated. It can only be forgotten or restrained. Civilizations depend on shared illusions, narratives that stabilize order, justify sacrifice, and explain suffering. These narratives are not inherently false, but they are fragile. Certain truths destabilize more than they enlighten when revealed prematurely. They strip meaning before replacement is possible. They create freedom without direction. If the Templars recognized such a truth, disappearance becomes rational. Revelation would fracture society faster than it could adapt. History offers examples. Scientific truths suppressed for centuries because societies were unprepared. Philosophical ideas condemned because they undermined existing order. Timing matters. Truth revealed too early becomes destructive. Truth revealed too late becomes irrelevant. The Templars may have understood this, that responsibility sometimes requires restraint, that silence can be protective rather than cowardly. Their destruction ensured the truth would not spread uncontrollably. Their survival in fragments ensured it would not be lost entirely. By disappearing, they delayed impact. They preserved potential. The secret did not vanish because it was false. It vanished because it was powerful enough to wait. What remains is absence, gaps in records, missing explanations, unfinished stories, silence that feels intentional rather than accidental. Historians are trained to distrust silence, but silence can be data, especially when it appears consistently, strategically, and at moments of maximum consequence. The Templars did not defend themselves publicly. They did not leave manifestos. They did not explain their beliefs before dying. That restraint echoes. It forces later generations to confront uncertainty rather than consume conclusions. Questions linger not because answers are impossible, but because they were withheld. The mystery persists because it was designed to. Every theory circles the same void. Something was known, something was protected, something was judged too dangerous to articulate. And in that void, imagination grows, not wildly but persistently. Silence becomes a mirror. It reflects the limits of accepted history and invites deeper inquiry. The Templars may be gone, but their quiet refusal to speak still shapes the conversation. It reminds us that some truths are not missing. They are simply waiting. Perhaps the final secret was never meant to be found quickly or easily or by everyone. What if the Templars assumed humanity would eventually reach a point where the truth would no longer destroy belief, but refine it? Where understanding could replace obedience without chaos? In that case, the secret is not lost. It is dormant. It exists in symbols, in questions, in patterns that only reveal meaning when perception changes. The Templars may have trusted time more than people. Time filters intention. It reveals readiness. If the secret still waits, it waits not in vaults or ruins, but in interpretation, in the willingness to question authority without seeking replacement idols. The real test may not be discovery, but maturity. Until then, the silence remains appropriate, protective, necessary, and perhaps the most unsettling thought of all is this: the Templars did not fail to preserve their secret, they succeeded. The only question left is whether we will recognize it when the time finally comes, or whether we will do what history has always done when confronted with uncomfortable truth: and choose silence once again.